Towering over the beautiful landscape of Cumbria, Muncaster Castle is an imposing and formidable structure, with the oldest parts dating back to 1325. But the family who still live in the castle today share their beautiful home with several ghosts, whose stories are etched into the very fabric of the castle and where the spectral residents still make their presence known. Its dark past has led to the castle's paranormal reputation, with stories of hauntings, murders and tragedy fascinating paranormal investigators, historians and visitors. Welcome to the ghosts of Muncaster Castle. The oldest ghost at Muncaster Castle is believed to be Henry VI, who haunts the king's bedroom. Henry VI has a unique connection to the castle, which dates back to the Wars of the Roses in 1464. He was the only son of Henry V and Catherine of France. He was only 9 months old when he succeeded his father, and just 8 years old at his coronation at Westminster Abbey in November 1429. Henry was a pious and scholarly king who was precipitated into the tumultuous Wars of the Roses, a series of English civil wars between the Plantagenet houses of Lancaster and York for the English throne. Both houses claimed the throne through descent from Edward III, and the name Wars of the Roses came from the symbol associated with each house: the white rose of York and the red rose of Lancaster. The conflict arose due to several factors, including the inadequacy of King Henry. He was regarded as indecisive, melancholic, and prone to bouts of severe mental illness. Henry had to contend with the ambitions of his rival, Richard, Duke of York. Many bloody but indecisive battles were fought, which culminated in the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, in which Richard III was killed and Henry Tudor became king, 14 years after the death of Henry VI. The wars ended with Henry Tudor as Henry VII, uniting the two houses by marrying Elizabeth of York. This established the Tudor dynasty and brought a new era to England. The Battle of Hexham, fought on the 15th of May 1464, was one of the defining clashes of the Wars of the Roses. A decisive victory for the Yorkists brought a temporary end to organised Lancastrian resistance in the north of England. The battle took place near the market town of Hexham in Northumberland, a county that had been a Lancastrian stronghold. Following his defeat at the Battle of Hexham, Henry became a fugitive in his own land, but continued to be afforded safety in various Lancastrian houses across the north of England. He tried to seek shelter at nearby Earton Hall, but was turned away by the Yorkist owner. Angered, Henry cursed Earton Hall and spent a night under a tree in the grounds of the manor, and this 1,000-year-old oak tree still stands and is now known as the King's Oak. Henry was found wandering on Muncaster Fell and was brought to the castle by a group of shepherds. The castle's owners, Sir John Pennington and his wife, sheltered him for 9 days, and he slept in the king's bedroom on the first floor of the castle. In gratitude, the king presented his hosts with a gilded drinking bowl made of fine Venetian glass, decorated with gold and white enamel, promising that as long as it remained unbroken, the Penningtons would reside at Muncaster and enjoy good fortune. The cup, or luck of Muncaster as it is known, is still undamaged and is kept safely within the castle. The Pennington family has retained possession of its castle for over 8 centuries. A traditional verse promises, "It shall bless thy bed, it shall bless thy board, they shall prosper by this token. In Muncaster Castle good luck shall be, till this charmed cup is broken." As long as this bowl remains unriven, the Penningtons from Muncaster shall never be driven. But what of King Henry's fate? Sadly, he was not so lucky. Henry continued to be sheltered by Lancastrian supporters at houses across the north of England for several weeks. Whilst he was in hiding at Waddington Hall in Lancashire, he was betrayed by an informant, nicknamed the Black Monk of Addington. On the 13th of July 1464, a party of Yorkist men entered the house to arrest Henry. Henry fled into nearby woods, but was soon captured at the stepping stones over the River Ribble at Brungerley. He was subsequently held captive in the Tower of London. He lived in the Tower in relative comfort for 5 years and found himself briefly back on the throne for 6 months. But after defeats at the battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury and the death of his 17-year-old son, Edward of Westminster, he was returned to the Tower in the spring of 1471. On the night of May the 21st, 1471, just days after the Battle of Tewkesbury, Henry was found dead in his cell. The circumstances surrounding Henry's death have been a source of speculation and controversy for centuries. Edward IV, the eventual victor at this stage of the Wars of the Roses, claimed that Henry died of despair, brought about by his failures, the death of his 17-year-old son at Tewkesbury, and the capture of his wife. Many historians see this as convenient propaganda, and it may be that he was murdered on the orders of his successor, Edward IV. Later chroniclers, writing in the Tudor period, implicated Edward IV's younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, later Richard III, in Henry's death, claiming that Richard himself was responsible, applying fatal blows to Henry with a dagger whilst he was at prayer in the Wakefield Tower. However, we must be wary of such accusations, as they were made after Richard's own death and during the reign of the Tudor dynasty, which had a political interest in blackening Richard's reputation. Henry's mournful apparition is said to appear on the anniversary of his murder, pacing along the interior of the Wakefield Tower until the stroke of midnight, where he fades into the stone walls and rests for another 365 days. But Henry also returns to the king's bedroom at Muncaster Castle ever since his death. Perhaps this is because it is one of only a few places where he enjoyed peace and security. The room contains a magnificent carved oak bedstead where he apparently slept. In 1927, the Prince of Wales, who later became King Edward VIII, stayed in this room and slept in this bed on his visit to Cumbria. His bodyguard had a frightful night pacing up and down the corridor, and many believe he may have experienced a paranormal encounter. There are many impressive and beautiful paintings, sculptures and pieces of furniture throughout Muncaster Castle. Perhaps most striking is a full-length portrait of Thomas Skelton hanging at the end of a corridor. Thomas Skelton was employed as a jester at the castle and is believed to be the original Tom Fool, who is said to have inspired Shakespeare's Fool in King Lear. But this is a painting with a paranormal connection. Thomas Skelton is thought to be one of the most prevalent spirits at Muncaster, still playing tricks on the family, staff and visitors. The picture depicts a tall, middle-aged man, ruddy in complexion, and dressed in a green and yellow jester's motley. The castle's archives show records of the purchase of this garment. In one hand, he holds a staff of office, a symbol that he was a trusted steward of the family estate. A document, attested to be his will, hangs next to him. No detailed records of Tom were ever kept in the castle's documents, but it's thought that he was hired by Sir Alan Pennington to act as a personal steward and tutor to William Pennington, who was 14 when his father died in the mid-16th century. It's unusual for a portrait to exist of a servant, but perhaps this represents his importance to the family. Like many jesters, Tom Skelton was entertaining, quick-witted and lively. According to local stories, he would put grease up wooden banisters on the staircase to annoy guests. Then, when asked who was responsible, Tom quipped that everyone had a hand in it. But behind his comic facade was a dark secret. Tom was a ruthless, despicable murderer, responsible for several gruesome killings through his cruel jokes. One of his favourite pastimes was to sit under the old chestnut tree on the Cannon Bank, which now bears his name. He would chat with weary travellers and offer directions to passers-by on the road that ran by the castle. Anyone he took a dislike to would not be helped on their way, but instead be misdirected towards a dangerous section of quicksand by the River Esk, from which there was a slim chance of escape. Even more alarming is that Tom is said to have watched their slow deaths before attacking them and burying their heads under tree trunks. Whether true or not, this grim story isn't the worst thing attributed to Tom. Tom's master was a spiteful and vicious character. The story goes that the unmarried daughter of Sir Alan Pennington, whose name was Hellwise and who lived at the castle at the time, absconded one night to go to a dance in the local village. It was May Day and the festivities were in full swing, but Hellwise was there for one reason only, to meet her secret lover, Richard the carpenter. Hellwise was due to marry a man of nobility, as her father would never approve a match with a lowly craftsman. Dressed as a shepherdess, Hellwise Pennington disguised her identity and rejected the advances of a pushy local lad known as Wild Will of Whitbeck. Instead, she danced with Richard the carpenter, her true love. To get his revenge on the lovers, Wild Will explained the events to a local knight, Sir Ferdinand, who also wanted to marry Hellwise. Sir Ferdinand was quick to act and enlisted Tom Skelton to exact his revenge on Richard the carpenter. Tom, who was already convinced that Richard had stolen money from him, needed little persuasion to be involved in this particular escapade. Skelton plied Richard with cider, and once he was suitably drunk, he enticed him back to the Tapestry Room at Muncaster Castle, where he promised Richard a private night with Hellwise, who he said was already waiting. Knowing their relationship could never lead to marriage, a somewhat intoxicated Richard, along with Skelton, returned to the castle. In the Tapestry Room, there was no sign of Hellwise. Tom said not to worry and that he'd go and find her. Feeling sleepy, Richard lay on the bed and began to nod off. It was at this moment that Skelton used Richard's very own carpentry tools to murder him. He boasted to the other servants, "I have hid Dick's head under a heap of shavings, and he will not find his head so easily when he awakes, as he did my shillings." Ever since this terrible atrocity occurred, The Tapestry Room is said to be home to the ghost of a headless man who startles those sleeping as he paces slowly across the floor. Tom is said to have died around 1600. Ironically, he became caught in the quicksand, in which he deliberately sent so many to their deaths. Drunk, he went the wrong way when returning to the castle in the early hours of the morning. His body remains in the quicksand to this day. Tom's restless spirit is blamed for tricks being played on unsuspecting visitors and staff, and for equipment unaccountably failing to work. The current owners believe that Tom is still residing in the castle, and they attribute most of the strange happenings to him, especially when objects go missing. He is often felt or heard, but he is never seen. When looking at the painting, some visitors hear loud footsteps traversing over a stone floor, but strangely the corridor and the nearby staircase are carpeted. Are these the echoes of Tom Skelton, pacing through the corridor, close to where he murdered an innocent man? But others feel these are not the sounds of footsteps at all. Rather, they are the sounds of thudding, as the body of Richard was dragged from the Tapestry Room under the cover of darkness before being dumped. The sorrowful sounds of a young woman crying can sometimes be heard and are attributed to Hellwise, who was sent to a nunnery in the aftermath. Peter Frost Pennington, who lives at the castle today, stated, "Many people are pretty sure he's still here, playing tricks. I didn't believe in ghosts when I came here. You'll be showing people around and equipment will stop working. One or two people have reported being shaken in their beds." Is the evil, sadistic and cruel spirit of Tom Skelton still roaming the corridors of Muncaster Castle? Is he responsible for the evil laughter and startling visitors close to his portrait to this very day? The most haunted area of Muncaster Castle is the Tapestry Room. Despite its opulent decor, Flemish hangings, rich Georgian furniture and Elizabethan fireplace, this room has a profoundly chilling atmosphere. Visitors complain of disturbed nights, with unexplained phenomena. Objects move by themselves, footsteps are heard walking through the red corridor outside when no one is there, and visitors have also felt cold in the room for no apparent reason. The current Pennington family gave up using the Tapestry Room as guest accommodation, as so many people regularly reported bizarre occurrences. For decades, guests have reported paranormal activity, the most frequent being the sound of an unseen baby crying, particularly near the window. The voices of children recounting nursery rhymes and laughing as though they are playing hide and seek wake guests in the early hours. The soft, gentle voice of a female singing, believed to be a mother or a nanny, consoling an ill or upset infant, puzzles visitors who stay the night. A friend of the Pennington family, James Cartland, experienced the phenomena firsthand in the 1980s. He said, "It was sort of as if someone was talking but muttering. A sort of strange sound, I can't really explain it. I stuck my head up the chimney and thought it might be the wind. It was a very quiet night, very frosty and quiet. I was the only person in that wing of the castle, so there was nobody else there to make the noise. Everybody else was at the other end. I went back into the room and it was still going on. And it was more audible by then. I mean, it was definitely the sound of a child crying and somebody talking to it, as if the child was ill. I got back into bed and I never slept a wink. A terrible night." Another witness was the late Lord Carlisle, who had a very disturbed night in the Tapestry Room. The curator at the time stated, "Lord Carlisle told me that he'd only once stayed in Muncaster, and that time he'd been in the Tapestry Room. He'd woken up to the sound of a baby crying, and he said he'd never been more terrified in his life. And he was a man who'd won the Military Cross in the last war, so he wasn't a man who was easily frightened. But he said nothing would get him to stay at Muncaster again." In 2003, one visitor wrote in the castle's guest book, "I had a weird experience in the four-poster bed. I felt that my body was touched, and for a split second I was unable to make a noise. I couldn't control a flow of tears for about 45 minutes afterwards. A very eerie and heart-pounding night. We heard what sounded very much like a baby cry, then suddenly stop. That was enough for us to leave the Tapestry Room and stay in the dressing room all night." James Cartland carried out research into the history of this section of the castle. By looking at some plans of the castle from the 19th century, he discovered that during extensive renovations in 1862, sections of the old nursery building were incorporated into the Tapestry Room we see today. Records show that tragedy struck the Pennington family in the past. In 1862, Gemmill Augustus Pennington, the 4th Baron of Muncaster, died unexpectedly in Naples, Italy, aged just 30, of a gastric fever. He left a widow, Jane, and a daughter, Margaret Susan Pennington, who was just 2 at the time. But sadly, as Margaret grew, she began to suffer from seizures and other health conditions. At the tender age of just 11, Margaret passed away. Whether Margaret is responsible for the hauntings in the Tapestry Room, we don't know, but we do know that she played there when she was a child. Inside the Tapestry Room, some have heard rustling fabric as an invisible entity brushes past them, and the feeling of someone sitting down on the bed. The door handle of the Tapestry Room is a favourite with the castle's spirits. Something causes the door handle to rattle in the middle of the night, as though someone is trying to gain entry, and sometimes the door physically opens. Visitors see the handle itself rotating and get up to check who it is in the corridor, but it is always empty. The heavy footsteps seem to walk and pause at the threshold of the Tapestry Room. Guests have witnessed dark, three-dimensional shadows lurking around the room, and sometimes these figures will stand over people as they lie in the antique bed. The room has a chilling feel about it, with many visitors sensing a negative energy, and with some too fearful to enter. People have complained of chest pain, feelings of pressure on their abdomen, and being overwhelmed with sadness. Many paranormal investigations have been held in the Tapestry Room, and frequently ambient changes and EVPs are recorded. Temperature drops can be so sudden that on a warm summer's day, people begin to see their breath as they would on a frosty morning. Electrical equipment often drains for no apparent reason and becomes unreliable, hindering the progress of the investigators. On one occasion, a group of experienced investigators collectively witnessed the black shadow of what appeared to be a child walk across the Tapestry Room before vanishing. Scratching noises have been heard in the fireplace, and some have been physically touched, including one person who felt something grip hold of his neck. A strange incident occurred in the Tapestry Room involving a 4-year-old girl. Her mother was one of the cleaners at the castle, and on days when childcare wasn't available, she would sometimes accompany her mother to work. The mother and daughter were in the Tapestry Room when a picture was knocked over. Naturally, the mother blamed the little girl and told her to be more careful. The daughter explained that she had not touched it and that the little girl she was playing with had been responsible. Mum thought the daughter was just trying to get out of trouble and didn't dwell on this for too long. At home that evening, the daughter asked for a place to be laid at the table for her friend and for some dinner to be served. It seemed the daughter was convinced she'd brought an imaginary friend home. At this time, a television company was filming at the castle and asked if the daughter would be willing to speak of her experience, but she didn't want to. She explained that she didn't want to scare Susan away. Peter Frost Pennington spoke to the little girl about Susan, and she replied that was the name of the little girl in the bedroom she had been playing with. But, strangely, Margaret Pennington, who died at just 11, was named Margaret Susan Elizabeth Pennington. It is rather strange that a child as young as 4 came up with this particular name. Surely she wouldn't have known of the death of Margaret in 1871. Did the daughter encounter the apparition of Margaret in the Tapestry Room? Is it the case that children are more sensitive to paranormal entities? Does Margaret enjoy interacting with those children who visit the former nursery? The grounds of Muncaster Castle are haunted by the tragic figure of a woman in white. She has been seen many times and even ventures onto the nearby A595, the Cumbrian coast road, where she startles drivers. She is known locally as the Muncaster Bogle and is thought to be the apparition of Mary Bragg, a young housekeeper from Ravenglass who was murdered on the road near the main gates in 1805. Over the years, the story has changed, but articles from the 1800s suggest the following sequence of events may have occurred. Mary Bragg was a young lady working as a housekeeper for the Grice family. She fell in love with John Pickthall, the owner of the nearby Swallowhurst farm in Bootle. He and his brother were relatively affluent and acquired several farms in Bootle before selling them at a profit to the Grice family. Mr. Grice was the parson for Drigg and Urton. Mary was a well-liked young lady, good-looking and clever, and through the sale of land to the Grice family, she caught the eye of John Pickthall, who was regarded by the community as a decent fellow. Pickthall at this time had a respectable career as the steward of Muncaster Castle. Mary and John became betrothed, but the course of true love never does run smooth. The housekeeper at the castle also had her sights set on John Pickthall and soon began to hatch a plan to make John hers. One evening, when the Grice family were away from home, the housekeeper at Muncaster sent 2 men with the surnames Scott and Gale in a coach to the Grice property, knowing Mary Bragg would be alone. The men knocked on the door and told Mary that her lover, John, had been taken seriously ill. If she wished to see him alive, she needed to get ready quickly and come away with them to Muncaster Castle. She locked the house, got into the carriage and journeyed towards the castle. When the party reached the darkest stretch of the road, Mary was attacked and dragged out of the carriage. Despite Mary's best efforts to fend off the assailants, one of them drew a pistol and shots were fired. Mary died instantly, just by the gates of the castle. Mary's body was taken to a hay shed close to the River Esk. It is thought they believed wild animals would consume her body. The following day, a farm labourer from the castle discovered Mary's body. He ran back to the castle in terror, explaining what he had found. He was met with a very frosty reception. The housekeeper threatened to hang him if he ever mentioned anything about the discovery. The following day, the murderous men dumped Mary's body in the river itself, tucking it tightly under an overhanging bank. The community searched high and low for Mary, but no trace could be found. A while later, a fisherman on the Esk noticed what seemed to be a woman's clothing bobbing up and down in the river. Assistance was procured, and the body of Mary was retrieved. It was clear she had been the victim of foul play. At the inquest, a doctor stated it was impossible to determine the cause of death, but many believe he'd been bribed to cover over the murder. The police began an investigation, but no arrests were made. John Pickthall never recovered from the loss of his beautiful bride-to-be. Rumours swirled, and the finger of blame pointed firmly at the castle's housekeeper. The guilt became too much, and she ultimately made the decision to end things permanently in Whitehaven a few years later. Gale was hanged for highway robbery he committed in London. Scott, who was always suspected of being involved in the murder, lived a life of hardship and poverty, ending his days in a workhouse. For over 200 years, visitors and staff members have reported seeing the ghost of Mary Bragg wandering the grounds of the castle, particularly close to the castle gates and along the nearby road. Mary's ghost is usually dressed in a long white dress, possibly her nightgown. She has been seen as a misty figure and as a solid form, stepping out in front of cars before vanishing. The tree Mary Bragg was alleged to have died under was said to be cursed. In an interview in 1999, Peter Frost Pennington stated, "In the 80s we had to cut the tree down. At the first cut of the chainsaw, blood spurted out. It turned out to be a bat's nest, but the poor lad wielding the chainsaw went ashen, and within a year he was involved in a terrible accident. We could not sell the timber anywhere in the country." A week later, one of our cleaners, who lives in the lodge, was driving home late one night past that spot when she saw a woman looking very distressed. When she went to see if she was all right, she wasn't there. Tales of a white figure haunting the grounds persist to this day. Tony Warburton, a founder of the Owl Centre at the castle and a skeptic, witnessed a mysterious white figure one morning. Frost Pennington stated, "When he was out early one morning, he saw a white shape he couldn't explain. When I suggested it might be something to do with the early morning mist, he said no. It was a definite shape, which seemed to be moving purposefully across the grass." Another apparition linked to the White Lady was reported in the news in 1860. One icy cold night, a traveller heading to the Pennington Arms in Ravenglass found himself caught in a heavy winter storm. Despite the terrible weather, he pushed on ahead, looking forward to arriving at the nearby pub. Just as the night sky was illuminated by a flash of lightning, he witnessed a coach and two horses travelling at breakneck speed, and the traveller observed what he believed to be a struggle going on inside the carriage. He described an evil-looking individual holding a pistol close to the head of a pretty-faced wench. In a moment, the carriage had passed into the gloom. A singular fact that the traveller could not understand was that, notwithstanding the rapid pace at which the carriage was travelling, no sound appeared to be produced. At the Pennington Arms, the traveller relayed his story to his companions. One replied, "Oh, that must be the Muncaster Bogle." Sadly, it seems the restless spirit of Mary Bragg still roams the area around Muncaster Castle. Perhaps she is looking for justice after her life was taken so savagely from her many years ago. Or perhaps she's looking for John Pickthall, her true love, whom she adored. I hope you enjoyed these stories from the beautiful Muncaster Castle. I visited the castle many years ago on a geography field trip, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a bit. I have loads to cover today, some ghost stories, a death certificate, a leaflet and some postcards. If we just go back to Muncaster Castle, there are so many stories connected with the paranormal at this place. It was really hard to narrow them down for this video. The rocking horse that belonged to Margaret Pennington has orbs and light anomalies connected to it. I always find rocking horses a bit creepy, to be honest. Another story links to a man who was thrown from the top of the Peel Tower in the 14th century. I don't quite know what happened, but there was some sort of altercation about hunting rights on the land, and he climbed the tower with another chap to point out the land owned by his family, and things turned nasty. His ghost is seen falling, but when people go to look for the man's body, there's nothing to see, no corpse or body or evidence of his fall even. Possibly one of the strangest hauntings is said to be in the grounds, and it's the sound of a growling big cat. Now, there are stories of big cats all over the UK, but this one is said to be a lion that was shot by the last Lord Muncaster in Kenya and who brought the skull back to the castle. And I must admit, as much as I love cats, that is not a ghost I would like to bump into. I thought it was quite interesting that on the 24th of August 1939, over 700 paintings and works of art were brought to Muncaster from the Tate Gallery in London for safekeeping, and works by Van Gogh, Manet and Turner were all moved here secretly, and it's a good job they did because the Tate did indeed get bombed on the morning of the 16th of September in 1940. A huge bomb was dropped close to the Tate. All of the glass windows on the south side of the gallery were blown outward, and the offices and roofing were destroyed. If we just go back to Urton Hall for a moment and the story of King Henry, I read various versions of this, but apparently Anne, the wife of John Urton, the Yorkist owner who turned Henry away, felt sorry for Henry, and allegedly she brought out food for him and helped him whilst he was in hiding in the grounds. And when John Urton found out about this, he was outraged, and he locked her up in the tower, starved her and then bricked her up into the walls of the tower. And apparently she haunts as a grey lady at Urton Hall, and she's been seen quite regularly. So maybe she has somehow become the victim of King Henry's curse. I have a copy of Margaret's death certificate from 1871, and it's only small, but I think it's worth a look. And she died in London in the Pulteney Hotel, which is now long gone, but it was at 82 Piccadilly. Under cause of death, we have rheumatism, peri and endocarditis, so it seems she had inflammation of the heart, and then we have chorea, and I think that's where the reference to seizure comes in, because chorea involves irregular and unpredictable muscle movements, and it affects people's arms, legs, facial muscles, and it comes from the Greek word that means to dance. And it is really sad because the symptoms can happen quite slowly or happen all at once, and include things like clumsy movement, muscle weakness, stumbling and falling, and it's quite possible that she may have struggled to speak clearly and maybe struggled to write, and it's so sad that she died at such a young age, poor girl. I think for many of us, we first heard about Muncaster Castle on Strange But True, which was essential Friday night viewing for me in the 1990s. I absolutely loved that programme. And quite a few of the episodes are actually on YouTube, but the quality isn't great, but it is better than nothing. I'll tell you a bit about my trip to the castle. In the mid-1990s, I went to Cumbria on a residential geography field trip for a week when I was studying for my A-levels. As much as the landscape there is truly beautiful, this trip was the longest week of my entire life. And these are all first world problems for sure, but I'll tell you about them. For a start, it was in the school holidays. So rather than having a week off, we had to actually do 7 days of proper work. It rained a lot and we were in the middle of nowhere and we had to climb serious mountains, dig up soil, measure rivers, all of this stuff, and we had to make our own food. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was there was no TV for a whole week. This was before the age of mobile phones and the internet. We had heard a rumour from the group that had gone the year before that there was no TV, but we didn't believe it. We really thought they were joking. And for my friends and I, that meant no Neighbours, no Home and Away, no EastEnders, no The Bill, Gladiators, or Strange But True. And very quickly we became a rather feral group of bored teenagers, and we couldn't wait to go home. And I had brought books with me because I've always enjoyed reading, but some of my friends were completely lost without the TV. On one of the days, luckily a day where it was sunny, we went to Muncaster Castle, largely to do work in the grounds there. And our teacher told us that we were going to see the bird flying display because they do really interesting research and conservation work there for various birds. Now, I will admit I am not a fan of birds. I find them scary. I'm okay with them in the wild, or if they're doing their thing in my garden, that's fine. But I just have a bit of a thing with them. I think it's to do with their beaks and their eyes and their legs and their feet. But no rational reason, they just freak me out. My friends knew this, so when we got to the bird display, there was the need for a volunteer. All of my friends were volunteering me, and I was so embarrassed because, you have to try and at least look cool in front of your friends. And the next thing I know, I'm wearing a gigantic leather oven glove thing on my left hand, and within seconds there was this bloody big owl on my arm. And that's when the panic really started to begin. Don't get me wrong, they are absolutely magnificent birds. They really are beautiful, but for me to have one on my arm, that really got me in a bit of a tiz. My friend said that when I saw the owl, I went as white as a sheet. So the handler did this call and off it flew and we were all watching it. And I thought, phew, it's over. I can take this oven glove thing off. And the next thing I know, the handler said, put your arm back out. So I did. And it was like wallop as it landed on me. The power in the bird is extraordinary. It really was. It was like something had run into me. And then the handler was talking about their vision and what they eat and all of this. And my arm is getting tired. I'm holding it out as best as I can with this poor owl on it. And I was just looking at this owl like it was some sort of unexploded bomb. I was so scared. And I kept saying to myself, don't show you're scared. It'll sense your fear. Avoid eye contact. It was just ridiculous, and by the end I was convinced that one wrong move and that owl would have killed me and probably ripped me to bits and fed me to its chicks. And I was very glad indeed when that was all over and I took that awful leather glove off. Never again would I do that. I have this really lovely barn owl envelope and stamp set here from Muncaster Castle. I really like what it says on here. It says, owls cannot move their eyes and have to turn their heads instead in the familiar smooth rotation. Their great golden eyes and solemn stare give them a slightly eerie look, and their melancholy cry heard at night may explain why they feature in so many ghost stories. Well, I have to agree with that they do look eerie. Their flight is soundless, a great asset when hunting. Curiously, the female is larger than the male. They feed mainly on rodents, but reptiles, fish and insects are also eaten. I've got this little leaflet that I think is from the late 80s, maybe early 1990s, I'm not exactly sure. I'll just read a section of it. Set in an idyllic corner of the Lake District with a breathtaking view of Eskdale from the terrace, once described by John Ruskin as Heaven's Gate, Muncaster Castle has something for everyone. The castle has been the home of the Pennington family since the 13th century. The Peel Tower stands on Roman foundations and was extended through the centuries to form the castle as it is seen today. Now down the bottom it says, moving to the bedrooms, one of which is haunted, you will find magnificent four-poster beds dating from Elizabethan times, matched perfectly by 3 panels of Elizabethan tapestry. Here also you will find a portrait of Thomas Skelton, the last fool of Muncaster, who gave to the English language the word tomfoolery. And I have 2 postcards for you today. This first one is from Egypt, and I'm not sure what the date is on it, but it's from the reign of George V, and it was sent to Whitehaven, which is not far from the castle. Dearest Mary, just a card to let you know how I am getting on. We arrive in Naples tomorrow and join the yacht there. I have had a fine time on board, dancing, etc., and I shall be sorry to leave as I have been leading a gentleman's life. And no, I go back to work. Best love from, I think that says E.J. Langford. So I wonder what this person was doing on this yacht. It sounds very exciting. And this postcard is a bit older. It's from 1903 and it was sent to an address in Plymouth. We had tea in this garden just outside one of the middle windows. Just going to have a set of tennis, played 5 sets yesterday. Having a grand time, friends here yesterday, Whitehaven today, hope you are all well, don't expect many letters from me, shall send postcards instead. And it sounds like that person's having a great time. So that's it from me today. I just want to say thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It means so much to me. Don't forget to come and find me on Instagram. And all that's left to say is take care, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.